Joining me this evening on the couch here on Cork Live TV is a man that needs no introductions, TV3's Southern correspondent Paul Byrne. You're very welcome, Paul. Thank you so much.
Thanks very much for having me.
And thank you so much for joining us.
No problem.
So there's so much to talk to you about, obviously. The man who covers all the stories in the Munster region. But can we go back and start from, like, how did you get into the broadcasting industry in the first place? You started in the Pirates.
Pirate stations. I was just about 14 years of age. And I started in a station called CCLR, Cork City Local Radio. It was based in French Church Street. Upstairs, like most pirate radio stations at the time, they were either in an alleyway off the beaten track or in somebody's bedroom or in a shed out the back. And that's where it all started. I mean, these were stations that were held together with pieces of chewing gum, bits of string, plasters, bits of wire. But you know what? It was invaluable training, because this is where a lot of the people who were in broadcasting in this day and age actually started. This is where they cut their teeth. It's what I described as the fosse of broadcasting. And if we didn't have pirate radio stations back then, we wouldn't have a massive broadcasting area today, really.
Absolutely. Like, you worked with people like the Neil Prendevils of this world and Mark Malone. They're all with 96 FM now. Rob Allen, well, not Neil Prendeville obviously, but Rob Allen and Trevor Welch as well.
Trevor Welch, I met him later in a station called Radio Caroline. Ken Tobin, who's with 96 FM, I met him in his station called Radio Caroline. It was actually in a mobile home out the back of a house in Torker.
No way. A different Radio Caroline than the boat?
Than the one on the ship. No.
Very good. Okay, so you were down there as well?
Down there. We were everywhere. It was fantastic. And we became great buddies. I'd like it, but it was, they say you have to be half mad to work in pirate radio or in radio. To me, I think you have to be 110% bonkers. But it was absolutely, we had a ball, we learned a lot, we made a lot of friends, and thankfully most of us are still around to reap the rewards from the hard work, because we didn't earn a bob. You know, you made money out of doing discos afterwards and what have you like that. There was no money in pirate radio, but it was just a training ground.
It was the heyday of radio, really. When I hear the stories about it, I just wish I was there.
It was incredible. I mean, you mentioned Trevor Welch a while ago. He wrote a book, The Jolly Roger, some time ago. Yeah. And I mean, looking back and reading it and the stories, and it was, because we always said at the time, you know, as the years went on, oh God, there's a book in this, and thankfully somebody did get around to writing that book and putting it together.
Trevor and his brother Noel.
Yes, right. Yeah.
As you say, like you did discos and you were a DJ as well. Like, I mean, that's very light-hearted stuff. When did you get into the heavier stuff? I
went to work in 96 FM. I actually went up there to fill in, I think, for about 2 weeks, and I lasted 8 years.
No way.
Yeah. So I was working on Neil Prendeville's show at the time. I was dipping in and out of the newsroom, and you know, while I was always involved in light entertainment, I used to do a lot of comedy and different shows around the place, a lot of stage shows. I started to develop a taste for news and hard news, and I became very involved in a big investigation in Cork going back. There was 3 men went missing from an address in Cork. There was the
House of Horrors murder.
That's right. Yeah, Kevin Ball, Cathal O'Brien and Patrick O'Driscoll. Kevin Ball was a Welshman. He was staying in the Simon community from time to time. Patrick O'Driscoll was Cork, but he'd stay in the Simon from time to time. And Patrick O'Brien was from Wexford. He was a volunteer in the Simon community. They all got to know one another, and they got to know another couple of people. And to cut a long story short, basically the 3 of them were murdered. They've went missing. There were several searches. You know, there was digs carried out, and I actually found an area of woodland at the back of Vienna Woods. I worked very, very closely on this story. Got very good information from people in the underworld, as it were. And I remember one day being brought through the woods, through the back of Vienna Woods Hotel, by somebody who had information. He brought me to a site where Patrick O'Driscoll had actually been buried. But looking around at this area, you knew that something had been dug up, and his body had been removed less than 24 hours before we actually got to this area. There was a sock. There was bits of flesh, there was skin. It was actually frightening at the time.
And you were the first person on the scene?
Yeah, well, no, funnily enough, the guards had received information as well some months before that to say O'Driscoll is buried here at the back of Vienna Woods. They went out, they conducted a dig, they didn't go deep enough. And they were told by the person who had the information, you've got to go down deeper. They didn't do so. And we went out then, you know, I got a tip off and went out, but the body had been moved at that stage.
Because it's one thing that I've always heard is that if you want to get away with one crime in Ireland, it's murder. Like, he made it blatantly obvious. Like, I think he kept the body parts in his apartment for a while as well.
Yeah, because what happened was that the person who was tried for the murder was actually, who's since died by suicide a number of years ago. He was somebody witnessed him chopping up a body and putting it into black disposable bags and taking it to various places for burial, you know. But very sad story, because Mr. O'Brien, whose son, his remains have never been found, he travels from Wexford from time to time and still walks the area around Vienna Woods Hotel and, you know, up around Montenotte and all different areas looking for his son's remains. It's very sad. And
how does that affect you as a reporter on the whole story? Like, happening upon these areas and finding human flesh, like?
At the time, because you're so wrapped up in it, you know, you don't think about it. You've got your story, you've got to deliver it, whatever like that. But
desensitizing.
It's when you go home maybe a couple of hours later or maybe the next day you start thinking, Jesus, this is after happening, you know. And that's the case with a lot of stories as well.
Yeah, you were saying to me earlier about like covering cases with children, especially, that you find that those stories would affect you.
Yeah, I mean, you'd want to be tough as nails for these things not to affect you, because look, when it comes to children, they're so precious, and we've got so many cases of children in this country who are crying out for operations and they just can't get them, and their families will ring us to say, can we highlight their case? We will, if it's a news story, if it's a worthy news story, we'll go out and highlight it, that John or Mary are in need of life-saving surgery, they can't get the funding from the HSE, whatever the case may be. And, you know, it's a terrible thing, but 9 times out of 10, and I'm just saying it's never a guarantee that they're going to get results, but 9 times out of 10, Mr. and Mrs. X will have been knocking on the door of the HSE's office looking for funding, and they're told, sorry, not available. And within a week or so following the TV story, HSE come along and say, oh, we happen to have found the funding for you.
And you've been heavily involved in the Ava Toomey case as well.
Vera came to us to highlight it, and we did. And you know, she's been fighting hard for it, for medicinal cannabis. I know Ava is currently in Holland with the medicinal cannabis, and she seems to be doing fantastically well. But here's another lady who was forced to get out of the country. But having said that, Simon Harris has done all he can. He kept emphasising to them, he can't just prescribe medicinal cannabis at the stroke of a pen. It's a very, very complicated matter, but it's taken its toll on the Toomeys.
You know a lot of the inside story with what's going on, like when it comes to, you know, how it's presented on TV and on radio, it's probably not quite the story that you would know yourself. Like, how hard is that for you to deal with?
Well, you see, you've got to sit on the fence, as it were, and I've got to say, Mrs. Murphy will say A, the HSE or the City Council or such a department will say B. I've just got to balance it, and that's it. I'm the adjudicator, maybe, as it were. I'm not sure, or the scorekeeper, but you've just got to be impartial, and you've got maybe 1.5, 2 minutes to deliver somebody's situation and give the other person the right to reply, and you've just got to balance it and, you know, do your job. I
read that one of your cameramen got attacked at a court case. Would you find a lot of aggression?
That was the women. They love him. You know, they just maul him outside the courthouses.
It's the good-looking guy.
Exactly. They keep me inside. No, you know, you're standing outside the courthouse and you're waiting for Joe Bloggs to arrive. And if someone is attacked, it's normally by somebody who's not in custody, because if they're in custody, obviously they're handcuffed to the prison officers or the guards going in. So if somebody's on bail and they're on a trial, they're in and out of the courthouse, you know, every day. You're subjected to being spat upon, stones thrown at you, bottles, verbally abused, threatened. That's part of the job, to be quite honest with you. I remember a case where there was 2 guys on trial for possession of cannabis, I think about £1 million worth of stuff, and we were covering the trial for a couple of days, and every day they went into the courthouse, they were given the two fingers to the camera, they were roaring and shouting, and you know what, the more they did it, from a television point of view, it was great because they were making a complete arse of themselves. But people at home would see this, and it was making television. But we were in Cork prison maybe 2 years later, because the guys were actually convicted, and they got about 10 or 12 years a man. But I was in Cork prison a couple of years later filming, and we were filming in the kitchen where the trusted inmates are allowed to carry on and do their business and cook away in the kitchen. And one guy came up to me, he said, listen, I owe you an apology. And I said, for what? He said, do you remember such and such a case? I said, I do. He said, I was the guy, and every morning we used to be spitting at you. But I said, no, don't worry. But he came up and, you know, he was man enough to say sorry. But listen, I suppose, look, he knew going in and out of the courthouse every day he was facing 10 or 12 years in prison. He was up to 90, and I suppose we were the last people he wanted to see.
As a last question, like, is there any particular case in the last couple of years that has really kind of affected you?
Again, any case that involves children is very, very sad. I remember there's a family from Mill Street, a Polish family, a baby Jacob, and the little boy was born without any eyes, and they asked me to come down and do a story on it. And I remember just seeing him inside in his little carry cot. I broke down there, roaring, crying there and then, because I've got kids of my own. And even if you didn't, you would just say, oh, Jesus, why? Like, life is very unfair at times. And then there was the case of Robert Houlihan, a schoolboy, gorgeous looking boy from Middleton, who went missing a couple of years ago. And he was killed by his neighbour. It was a manslaughter case. Yeah. Robert went missing, and I remember, bad for days, but I think it might have been around the 4th of January in whatever year, and just went off that morning. It was a report of a schoolboy had gone missing, and I remember thinking, good luck, I'll see you later, whatever the case would be. And little did I know that we'd be down there 13, 14 days involved in the search and reporting on it, and unfortunately it had a horrific ending. You know, his body was found on close to a beach. But there are things that you think of from time to time, you know, if you're passing through Middleton, where Robert was from, and you might bump into his mum or his dad, and, you know, you'll always say, yes, sit down and have a chat with them when you meet them. But anything to do with children, it's very, very sad, really. That's the downside to the job. Yeah. There's lots and lots of upsides. Like, you see things in this job that most people won't see, and get to meet the strangest of people, the weirdest of people, the best of people. You know, you see some unbelievable, or come across some unbelievable stories. I mean, there was a man who he said if he reaches 100, he wanted to ride a horse. And we went down and covered the story, and there he was. I can still remember him going over the fields on his horse, and, you know, you're praying to Jesus that he won't fall or get a heart attack, but he fulfilled his dream, and he was 100 years of age, and he rode a horse. The next day then you could be doing a story on somebody who's on trial for murder, and no 2 days are the same in this job.
Yeah, it's definitely an interesting job that you have.
Yeah.
Paul Byrne, thank you so much for coming in and sharing your story.
Thank you very much indeed.
It was so lovely to meet you. Thanks a million.
Best of luck with everything.
Thank you very much. Same to you.
Who pays the check?
I know.